I haven't tried it.
I think they're recording it. Just hit continue.
Okay, so the recording has begun, and
We don't know.
okay.
Great.
Jane? Okay, Sandy, why don't you go ahead and before you get started again, I just obviously will apologize. There was a situation where our Zoom got hijacked by other people. It was, I guess, one of these traditional Zooms where people are just coming in and putting inappropriate material and taking over our meeting. So I tried to block people and get them out, but there were so many offenders coming in, so we had to cancel that Zoom meeting and just restart with a whole fresh new Zoom meeting. And now I'm obviously using a password and making all of the participants come into the waiting room before I allow them into the meeting. So hopefully we won't get hijacked. I'll say in advance if it happens, I'll try and block anyone, but if it really gets egregious, I'm just gonna quickly end the meeting and then we'll have to reconvene. So hopefully that won't be the case, but just want to put a plan out there. So with that, Sandy, let me turn it back over to you. Thank you.
All right, thanks, I appreciate it. Well, welcome everybody. Happy Saturday. Thanks for joining us for our virtual tasting here at Wine Express. I am Sandy Merlino, the wine manager and wine buyer here at Wine Express. And we've got a great lineup today. We have 5 wines. If you purchase them ahead of time, you would have 5 wines or whatever wines you selected. These wines are all coming from Grassroots. We've been doing a lot of tastings with Grassroots. And so I want to thank Kevin Sanfilippo, who's here with us. He's my rep for the upstate. So thank you, Kevin, for being along with us. And we have Todd Francis, who's our marketing manager. He is here to help guide us through this technically and hopefully smoothly today. Thank you for putting this together. And then we have a special guest. We have a special presenter. His name is Cameron Abbott. He is the national sales manager for the Piedmont guy. That's where these wines are coming through. So, or coming from, I should say. So we're gonna go ahead and turn it over to Cameron in just a second. I just wanna let everybody know that I have the wines in front of me. We're gonna start with the whites. It'll be with the Herboluce first, and then we'll go to the Arnaise and so on. So I'll hold them up as we're going through. So I want to say thank you all for being here. We appreciate your business. We appreciate your time. These have been a lot of fun. We've learned a lot about different regions and wines, and we just want to keep it fun. So thank you for being here. And Cameron, thank you for being here all the way from California to talk with us. So I really appreciate you taking the time. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Big thank you to Sandy and to everyone at Wine Express and to Kevin at Grassroots. You know, in these strange times, it takes a lot of pieces coming together to get on a Zoom call and taste wine together. And really our role in all of this as an importer of wine just from Italy and just one region in Italy is to communicate place and really allow you to understand these super site-specific wines that are in your glass or about to be in your glass, and to take you to that place. And I know there's so many hurdles that we're all feeling right now, given that we're sheltering in place or some form thereof. So I actually asked Todd to pull up a map that we fashioned a few years ago, and that'll help us walk through this region and taste through this region over the next 30 minutes or so. Keep in mind that this place we call Piedmont in northwest Italy, which you'll see on the map, is a region roughly the size of South Carolina. So when we're traveling from one winery to the next, imagine a venture maybe from Greenville to Columbia or Columbia to Charleston. I feel this sense of affection for both South Carolina and Piedmont, so it's easy to make those comparisons. The winemaking, the grape growing in Piedmont goes back centuries and centuries. Some of these grapes that we'll be talking about can be traced all the way back to Roman times. So that the sense of history runs very deep. And we as an importer have been drawn to this one place called Piedmont. it's a long story that I won't bore you with, but in a nutshell, we're something of a sappy country western story. The OG Piedmont guy met a woman from Piedmont, and they dated for years and years. When they split up, sort of from the ashes rose a phoenix kind of idea. He came back to America, started the Piedmont guy. He's a Midwestern guy named Weston, and he and I met in the Midwest about 7 years ago, and we partnered up. So now we're a 3-person team technically, and each of us kind of covers our own section of the country. And our sole mission is to spread the gospel of Piedmont, so to speak, to share all the stories that go into these wines, into these grapes. And really, without further ado, let's jump into the first wine. I'm not at my home, so I'm going to lean on Sandy to present the bottles. If you're staring at a seafoam colored bottle, this is from a winery named Czech, and it's a grape called Erbaluce. So as is always the challenge with Italian wine, we're talking about a name that's difficult to pronounce and a grape you've probably never heard of. We'll see Sandy pouring it out here. I do have a token glass of wine to be drinking with everyone. The Erbaluce in your glass comes from a thick-skinned, high-acid white grape that is typically trained on pergola. So when you walk these vineyards, you're actually walking beneath a canopy of grapes that grow about 10 feet high. And in this case, you'd be walking through the vineyard with an owner who is now 86 years old and his adopted Korean daughter. So you actually have this wild duo in northern Italy, a Sicilian father and a Korean daughter, specializing in a grape that 99.9% of the world has never heard of. Yeah, there's a great shot of the label. This for us is an immediate sort of swing wine. If you're accustomed to something like Pinot Grigio or Sauvignon Blanc, there are definite parallels. Spanish grape variety called Albarino is another one that I might tie into this. It's all stainless and sees no time in wood. So the name of the game here is bright, clean, crisp. You know, as you're heading into the summer months in South Carolina, this wine is definitely where it's at. They are, I'll have it on record as one of the 2 founding producers of modern day Erbaluce. So the OG, the original consumer and promoter of Erbaluce was Napoleon himself, and he made this wine into an internationally renowned grape variety. And then, like a lot of native, local, indigenous Italian grape varieties, this wine fell out of favor for a long time. You can imagine folks coming out of not 1, but 2 world wars, and then the worst of this disease in the vineyards called phylloxera. A lot of people gravitated more toward easy to grow white grapes, things like Pinot Grigio. And what we're seeing now, you know, whether it's Charleston Food and Wine or a local grape variety in Northwest Italy, is a desire, really a clamoring for local grape varieties. And we see it as our role to be transmitting the story of the grape and the place and the family all the way from this tiny little place in Piedmont to your kitchen or your dining room, as it were, right now. Sandy, maybe I'll defer to you as we shift from one wine to the next, or if you have any questions, if you feel like I'm leaving anything unsaid.
No, I just wanted to make a quick mention because Erbaluce is one of those, you know, strange varietals a lot of people don't know. I was glad to bring Erbaluce on into the store. I have 2 side by side, but I do love that you made mention that there's definitely somebody who's drinking Pinot Grigio or Sauvignon Blanc would connect well with this wine. It has definitely a really wonderful amount of minerality to it. So crisp, so delicious, so refreshing for, like you said, these hot days that are coming along. It has a little bit almost of a spritziness side of it too, as you mentioned, Vino Verde as well. So great correlation between all of them. It's one of my favorites. I love it. It's just so refreshing. So I'm glad to have it, and I hope that everyone is enjoying the Herba Luce. I want to go ahead and just jump right into the next wine if we can, since we have another white here. And I'm going to hold it up. So if anybody has it in front of them, this should be the unfiltered Arnase. So Cameron on.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you, Sandy. I'm, you know, despite my relative youth, I'm not the Todd of the group. So I don't know if this is going to work, but I thought it'd be cool to hold this up to my screen. If anyone can see this, this is sandstone and seashell, and it's the exact soil that this grape called Arnase is rooted in. If you enjoy Chablis or Champagne or wine from the Loire, the parallel is striking. When you're in this part of Piedmont, Todd, could we cue that map for a second? So if you're looking at a map of Piedmont, you'll see up north is this winery called Czech, which we just tasted from. And then if you were to drive roughly the distance from Czech to Angelo Negro, it'd be like driving from, say, Columbia to Charleston. And in that span of time, you're crossing over multiple geological eras. And when you end up at Angelo Negro, you're in one of 3 villages in all of Piedmont, actually in all of Italy, where they think you can find the youngest, sandiest soil to root white wine in. And the reason I share that is when you take this grape, which is famous in Piedmont and basically nowhere else, and you plant it in difficult soils that are less giving to clean, crisp, mineral-driven white wine, you tend to get kind of a flabby, uninspired wine. But when you seek out, again, soil that looks like this, again, like what you might find in Chablis, you get these laser-focused, high-acid, beautiful white wines. And that's why they named it Arnase way back when. This is a Piemontese word that means little rascal. So imagine a grape that just gives you tons of headaches if you plant it in the wrong soil, or I should say the inappropriate soil, or if you don't manage it well in the cellar. So we found a producer named Angelo Negro, which you'll see on this map, and they're based on the western side of this area called the Roero. And they'd been growing Arnase since 1670. So one of the oldest growers in the world. They practice biodynamics. So the more talk you hear about natural wine and everything that's appealing about making natural wine, not that there's any one definition to that, this winery really strikes at the core of that. They practice biodynamics in the vineyard. They don't add anything to the wine, and they don't filter it, which is quite obvious in the bottle, right? So you've got an unfiltered, unfined white wine. And we wanted to get so geeky about this that we asked them to execute no filtration. So you'll actually see on this bottle that you bought that it's labeled Vino Bianco. It's sort of an illegal Arnase. When it's not filtered and it's not crystalline enough, there's a committee that holds this bottle up to the light and they say, nope, can't call it Arnase. So what you're drinking is 100% this grape called Arnase, but it's listed Vino Bianco, wine not filtered. As far as we know, it's the only unfiltered Arnase coming out of Italy still. And it's something that we sort of obnoxiously asked for as an importer about 6 years ago. This adds up to the 7th different bottling of Arnase from this one producer. So they really hang their hat on the grape. And if you are ever fortunate enough to make it to the Negro winery, they would be happy to taste you through sparkling, still, and dessert versions of this one grape.
Heard. Okay, I think I'm back on. Well, this was an interesting add-on to the store as well, because we carried the filtered and bringing unfiltered. It was kind of interesting because customers are like, oh, is this wine okay? Is there something wrong with this? I see sediment and all kinds of stuff. And so it was interesting taking them through that conversation, or just bringing someone to that bottle and say, hey, let's try something really cool, really different. You're going to fall in love with it. And you mentioned Chablis, which is one of my favorites, which is great. That's exactly on the line. That's exactly where it's at. but for a quarter of the cost. So, or half of the, at least here in the store. So I'm glad you mentioned that. I think it's just so delicious. It is a funky wine. As far as it being unfiltered, for the customer, how long is this wine good? Like, how long would they be able to hold on to it without opening it and still expect to taste it the way we're tasting it today?
Great question. When you're a winemaker or an importer or a distributor like Kevin, you're always curious about that. You want to make sure people are opening wines when they ought to be opened. This wine, in terms of stability, can last a long time. They are racking or pumping the juice straight from the tank into the bottle. And in so doing, they're trapping the CO2 that comes from the tank to the bottle, which acts as a natural preservative. So even though there aren't added, there is no sulfur added, it can last a while. But then you get into this question of what do you want to be drinking? And I think the spirit of this wine is very much, again, like the Erba Luce, a brightness and an acidity and a crispness that might round out over time. So, I mean, I would say crack it now. What else do we have to do right now anyway, right?
Right, that's exactly right. If I may go back one, and I know we're on the Arnaz, but if I may go back to the Erba Luce,
sure.
I just wanted, if you could just touch quickly, because it is a DOCG, and at one time, Erba Luce was just DOC. Could you make a quick mention about that for the customers?
Yeah. There are, I would say there are two ways of understanding great wine from Italy. There is the structured way, and there are different tiers of classification, and you have to meet all the criteria within that tier to attain, say, DOCG status. And in the case of Czech, they've attained that, and that is the very highest qualification in Italy. And it's not a distinction that Erba Luce earned until 2011. And it was through the hard work of wineries like Czech that Erba Luce can be thought of in that vein. So truly in that world of great white wines coming from Italy. But then there's call it the new guard of folks who say, we want to make great wine and we'll break any rules necessary to make that wine. And that's kind of like, call it Exhibit B, unfiltered Arnaz. So there are two ways to think of it, but it's never downside, I think, to have that structure to learn wine that way. So if you're looking for high classifications of wine, it starts at the top at DOCG and then DOC below it. So it's never a bad thing to have those acronyms on the label.
Cameron, we had a question from Nancy, and Nancy and Kevin have been having a side chat here regarding the region. But while we're on there, Nancy, I took you off of mute. Did you have anything else to ask Cameron or Kevin about the region?
No. I just wanted to make sure I was following and to know where it was in case I'm out in Italy sometime soon. If I can travel,
well, let's hope.
I want to know where it is.
Absolutely, and it's good to have different people with their questions come in and mix it up. So glad to have you ask.
So far, I think everybody's enjoying these two white wines. I don't think there's any argument on that. So I'm going to say, let's go ahead and move on to the reds.
Okay,
and our first
great.
red should be the Langhe Rosso. So I'm go ahead and pour myself some.
Yeah, so I'll jump into this this third red. There's a category of wine that I'm increasingly a fan of the more I drink red wine, and I'd call it the chilled, crushable red wine category. That's not an official term, but that's very much what this wine is. So imagine 20% of the second wine that we tasted, 20% Arnaz, and then 80% of a grape called Nebbiolo. And most folks in the world would consider Nebbiolo one of the 5 greatest red grape cultivars in the world. And it happens to be that about 80% of that grape is planted in Piedmont. So this is really the lifeblood of Nebbiolo. And Nebbiolos can be, depending on how they're made, they can be quite bold and full-bodied. But in the case of a Langhe Rosso, it's almost like you're getting Nebbiolo with training wheels. This is a producer named Luigi Giordano, and they're going out into a family vineyard every vintage, and they pick Arnese and Nebbiolo at the same time, which in and of itself is pretty challenging. These grapes tend to ripen 4 to 6 weeks apart. But having done this for 4 generations, they've selected these parcels where they know they can pick roughly at the same time and co-ferment them, in the same vessel, and then ultimately put out a young wine that, as I mentioned, drinks really well with a little bit of a chill and can be consumed with food, but doesn't necessarily have to be. And the thing to know about Nebbiolo is that you've got high acid and high tannin. Truly one of the few red grape cultivars in the world that's nationally renowned, internationally renowned, and hits both of those notes. So imagine the acidity of Pinot Noir, but the tannin level of Cabernet Sauvignon. And so the beauty of that is that when the winemaker doesn't mess with the fruit too much, when they don't over extract the grapes, when they don't over oak the wine, you get a wine that can be in perfect harmony. And then when you go ahead and you add 20% white wine or 20% white grapes, you get something that's really fun too. If you're looking at the map, Roero is where Angelo Negro was based. And then if you were to drive 20 minutes southeast, you'd land in this little area called Barbaresco. And you'll see 2 arrows, one going to another producer that we represent called Cantina del Glicine, and the other one going to Luigi Giordano. So these are 2 wineries in this one zone. Luigi Giordano is the only winery that has ever thought to co-ferment Arnese and Nebbiolo in this one zone, in Barbaresco. There's a real precedent for it in other parts of the world. In Northern Rhone, they co-ferment Syrah and Viognier. So we'd like to think that's where they pulled the idea from. And there's a little bit of this practice to the northwest, again, back in the Roero. But no matter how you cut it, this is not a common wine to find. And as I mentioned, we've been going 4 generations now, the family has, producing this wine. Lady winemakers, which is always a plus. I find that that's been a really positive development in Piedmont, as a lot of daughters have taken over for fathers. Nothing wrong with the fathers, but I think those younger, fresher palates can often serve a cellar well. And that's really the name of the game with this wine. Just fresh, bright, crushable red wine.
I agree. Very crushable. And definitely something I would recommend for someone who is used to drinking Pinot Noir and they haven't ventured into many European wines or Italian wines, or they're afraid to. What a great gateway into like beautiful Italian wine without having to go into something too bold, too crazy that has to be opened up ahead of time. I did put a chill on this, so I'm drinking this and it's very, very nice. So
lovely.
Loving.
Yeah. And to Sandy's earlier point, the value in the wines that she's chosen to feature, this is a world that's a bit like Burgundy and Bordeaux. We're seeing prices go up right now. And the beauty of Piedmont is that unlike Burgundy and Bordeaux, there are still these gems, estate grown fruit, estate bottled wines that are $20 or less roughly on the shelves. And the beauty in that for me is that you don't have to drain your bank account to decide whether you like Piedmont. And all of these wines serve that role. The lower risk level, try these wines. If you decide they're not for you, you can go back to your other worlds. But we really hope they're like these gateway wines into other worlds, which I'll touch on as we taste.
Absolutely. You mentioned, thanks for mentioning that price point, because that's exactly where we're at with this Langhe Rosso. It's $19.99.
Okay,
the first
great.
two, Herbaluce and the Arnese, are both $15.99 in the store. So very, very reasonable. I mean, you could drink lots of this. So we'll go on to our 4th wine. So I'm really excited about this. I'm gonna
La
hold it up.
Maria Grignolino. That's a mouthful.
Yep. Say that again.
Right. So practically all Grignolino is planted in Piedmont. There's one producer in California, Heights, a pretty well-known Napa producer that grows Grignolino. So they've actually done a little bit of the mission work. I find that a surprising number of Americans are familiar with Grignolino because there's this tiny little bit growing in California. This is from an estate that has been growing grapes for 7 generations. They're based in this old fortress, this Roman armory. As Todd's helping us point out here, this village is called Castanole Monferrato. It'd be about a 45-minute drive from the winery we just tasted at. And in those 45 minutes, you come across a dramatically different landscape, higher elevations and sandier soils. Generally, sandy soils lead to less tannic, really pretty on the nose, easier to drink young wines. And that's, painting in super broad strokes. But keeping that in mind, this guy works with 3 red grapes in this village of Castanole Monferrato, one of them being Grignolino. And when we found him, this was about 4 vintages ago, he was making 840 cases of wine total. And he was not selling outside of this little blob called Asti on the map. So that for us was an amazing find. Someone who was making wine that in my mind's eye just felt and drank really untarnished, not influenced by sort of international trends. And the way he tells it, Grignolino has been in the family forever. They used to bottle it in these huge demijohns, tie it to a rope and lower it into the family well. And they'd keep it super chilled, again, like wine number 3. And they'd pull that demijohn up for dinner, and they'd pour it out, and it was very much an everyday chilled, again, crushable red wine. Where this diverges from Nebbiolo is the fact that it has on the inside of the grape 4 seeds on average. Most red grape cultivars in Piedmont have 1 or 2. And that's where this grape actually gets its name. So Grignolino effectively means to chew, or the seeds. And so you're getting this beautifully aromatic floral red wine, light to medium bodied. And at the same time, on the back end, if you're tasting this wine right now, you'll notice these short, chewy seed tannins, unlike that sort of outside of your mouth, really drying kind of like Cabernet Sauvignon tannin. It's a very different mouthfeel. And it gives you a window into how that part of the grape, that tannin, tastes. I'm based in Oregon, and I see this all the time with Pinot producers employing whole cluster maceration to attain that same sort of chew in the wine. This vintage, 2018, he's grown a little bit as we've grown him in the United States, and we've sold more and more of his wines, but he's effectively maxed out his vineyards, and that means 3,000 cases of wine a year. And of that, about 200 cases of Grignolino to the States each year. So this is tiny production. Again, if we go back in the direction of that rabbit hole that we call natural wine, this guy's a natural winemaker by virtue of laziness, right? He uses an old school basket press, native ferment, and then he just leaves the wine alone. He doesn't add anything. He doesn't filter the wines. So again, this is just another grape, another example of an indigenous Piemontese variety that's been unaffected by modern winemaking practices. Sandy, I think you're still on.
Yeah, I don't know if you could hear me. I was saying you can taste a lot of raspberry and tart cherry notes to it. And you're right, on the back end, there's the tannin. It's kind of interesting because it's so fresh and light in the beginning, and yet it picks up with a little bit of a tannin structure in the back, but really still fresh and light not heavy, something you could drink all summer long. This is delicious. And at 13.5% alcohol content too,
Yeah,
which I want to mention about that.
absolutely.
What is the oak regimen on this?
No, no oak. We're a big fan of, you'll see, Sandy, I'm sure you've tasted through a lot of our portfolio, either no oak, or if it's oak, it's neutral to the degree that it's not influencing the flavor profile, the primary flavor notes of the wine. We see oak as a vessel in which you can age the wine, you can maybe round out the edges, but you don't want to change maybe the fundamental character. And generally speaking, that's what we would call a traditional or a classic producer in Piedmont. The other thing I wanted to say is that I've found it helpful over the years as I've learned more and more about wine to think of tannin almost in the sense of brake pads. And when you have grapeseed tannin, it's almost like when you're on the last leg of your brake pads and your car is barely braking, but it's enough to balance the acidity and the tannin, and to remind yourself that, wow, even if this is a wine I could be drinking on the porch, I could be pairing it with foods. And when you have tannin at that low of a level, on its last brake pad, so to speak, you can pair it more versatilely. And I think what comes to mind is fish. And having visited South Carolina so many times, knowing that a lot of red wines, they don't work with those more delicate fish dishes. So that might be something to keep in mind if you're drinking this at home.
Quick question. Label is so cool looking, really. Got like this little old farmer kind of situation going on down here. What does am I saying it right? Maraja or
La Muralla. Yeah.
La
Yeah. Thanks for that question. Yeah, it's as I mentioned earlier, it's an old Roman armory. So that word is Piemontese dialect for the fort or the armory. And La Muralla is effectively, in the year 2020, or was, a restaurant, a bed and breakfast, and a winery. And I know Eugenio Gatti can't wait to get back to that. It's truly just a mom and pop operation there in Castanoli Monferrato.
Awesome. We've got one more red wine, so I'm going to go ahead and hold it up.
Great. Yeah. So back to Angelo Negro. This is DOC. So imagine the second highest possible classification for red wine. DOC called Longue Nebbiolo. So back up to Angelo Negro in the Roero. As I mentioned earlier, these are sandy, fossil-laden soils. And Nebbiolo, in its greatest renditions, comes from places like Barolo and Barbaresco, and Gattinara and Gemme up in the north. These are famous zones, and they've been famous for quite some time. They predate any well-known American wine region by decades, if not centuries, right? And the beauty of those wines is they're super serious in many cases. They can be aged for decades in many cases. But the drawbacks are, if you're not super familiar with Nebbiolo and you're just trying to learn a little bit here, sometimes you have to age them for a little while to get to a point of accessibility, drinkability, or you have to spend a fortune, unfortunately, in some cases. And again, when you go back to someone like Angelo Negro, this is an estate that has 70 hectares, which is, call it 160 acres of grapes, and they put out these beautiful wines, and they can do so. They have so many raw materials that they can do so at price points that are friendly. So this, in my mind, is the most powerful red wine that we import, in that it gets you into that world of Nebbiolo, again, for around, Sandy will have the exact price, but around $20. And they call this Angeline. So something to know on this label here, which Todd's pointing out for us, is this DOC called Longue Nebbiolo, by law, does not have to be 100% Nebbiolo. So if you're an importer, and an importer like us that's focused just on Piedmont, you want to be careful that what you're bringing to an American market is a true, pure unadulterated expression of Nebbiolo. And what Negro does year in, year out is ensures that it's 100% Nebbiolo and that it spends very little time in wood and that that wood is neutral. And on top of that, it being planted, the grapes being planted in sand and seashell yields this wine that, again, is less tannic. It's pretty on the nose. It's easier to drink young. If it's in your glass right now, you'll notice that you can see through this wine as you can see through a Pinot Noir. And that's really what you should be looking for. If a producer tried to cut corners and blend other grapes in this, it often doesn't have that Pinot Noir-like hue. And it often wouldn't drink as delicately as Pinot Noir.
Wow, very delicate, but I don't know if you can hear me. Am I still on? Okay, very delicate, but a lot going on in this wine.
Yeah,
this is going on. So, I mean, it's soft and pretty and light, but definitely over delivering for the price because we're charging $19.99 for this. So
right.
Amazing! This is delicious.
Yeah, in in normal times when we're out and about and we're traveling and we're talking to folks, whether consumers or wine buyers or distributors about Nebbiolo, and we often get this response of, well, this needs food, and to someone from Piedmont, to the Piemontese, that's a given. So keep in mind that you're welcome to drink this alone by itself, but it really does scream for food in a way that I think exceeds often a Pinot Noir or a Cab, because you've got both acid and tannin, and these are the things that make you salivate and want your next bite and then your next sip. Absolutely,
my mouth is still watering. So exactly. Wow, this was fabulous. The last three reds that we just tasted, they're all DOC as well, not DOCG or DOC. So I just wanted to make a quick mention.
Yeah, and generally, just to recap that, when you get into DOCG, it often means lower yields in the vineyards, which presupposes higher quality. It means longer time in wood or an aging vessel, and it sometimes means certain grape variety or varieties. So that the restrictions increase, but as we mentioned before, it's easy to find a great bottle of DOC too.
Absolutely. I've had great table wines from Italy, so absolutely. This has been fabulous. I'm just going to recap real quick what we tasted. So we started with the Herbaluce, which I absolutely love. We went on to our next white, which is the unfiltered Arnase, the Vino Bianco. And then we went to the Langhe Rosso, which is a blend. And then we went to La Miraya. Am I saying it right again? Oh my goodness, correct me.
Nailed it.
I didn't want to screw that up. And then our last was the Nebbiolo. So beautiful wines from the Piedmont region and absolutely delicious. We should probably maybe open up.
Yeah, she said open up. Oh, we're already unmuted. Hi, Sandy. I like the reds.
You know what? So, Cameron, I know you haven't been on with us, but Jane and Judy, this whole group, they're with us every week for a tasting. So literally, like,
and Victoria.
That's great. Thank you for joining.
The ones that drink.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
The whites are finding that they like reds, and the ones that drink reds are finding out that they like the whites. So this is the beauty of doing stuff like you all of a sudden find that there is a red you like or a white that you like. You just had not met it yet. So thanks for acquainted.
Well, Sandy, this is Judy. I told you that I think French wine is the best French wine, best wine. And my second choice would be from Italy. And I am not a white wine drinker, but I really did like the two whites. I did. And I don't know, they were just refreshing. I couldn't drink a whole bottle, but
I could hope she would.
Certainly drink a couple glasses. Well, and I'm opposite. I actually like the Italian wines better than the French ones. Yeah.
Well, Judy, just to touch on that, there's a big parallel here. I'm not saying that you're drinking French wines, but Napoleon did occupy this part of Italy, and he influenced the lines of succession, the way vineyards are parceled and handed down, or were at the time, and he influenced the winemaking. He sourced a lot of his wines from Piedmont in particular.
What I'm hearing is Napoleon was a bad guy, but he had good taste in wine.
He sure did.
But you know what? My everyday drinking is not either one of them.
Right.
It's Sandy knows, Australia. I'm a spice girl. I'm a old spice girl.
I just wanted to say thank you, Cameron. I really appreciated the history you gave. I could tell you're really passionate about what you know and everything that you do, and I just really loved learning the history of the area and stuff like that. I just wanted to say thank you.
Thanks for listening. It takes two to tango. Otherwise, I'm just talking to myself on Zoom. Yeah?
How much are each of those, Sandy?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Can you give us the price points on these bottles?
Yes, so the first whites are $15.99. Then when we move on to the Rosso, it's $18.99. And the last two reds are $19.99. The Mariah and the Napoleon. So
Everything's under $20.
The two whites are $15.99.
Sandy, I can't hear you.
Sandy's gonna have to expand her cooler.
Sandy, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so basically the first whites are $59. The first red.
You're breaking up.
The first red $18.99, and the last two reds were $19.99. So everything is under $20.
Yeah.
So about
$19.99.
Our price point.
All right.
okay. I have another case.
Ready?
Ah, you got it.
She's gonna have to expand her cooler.
Yeah.
Do that. I might have to change some. It's time.
Take a pantry and just make it a wine rack.
Got a lot of wine here.
We're gonna close our pantry and make it a wine rack.
I think that's great.
I support that.
Yeah, there, you start digging down.
Well, I want to thank you all for being here. This was fabulous. Again, fabulous wines brought to us by the Piedmont guy and Grassroots. So awesome to taste everybody through on some Italian wines that you probably never heard of. Arnese is not something that a lot of people know about. Erba Luce for sure. And then, you look at these labels and you don't know what they are, and it's hard to pick up something you don't know what it is. So it's great to do a tasting like this, get a little, history, get the knowledge, taste the wine along, and it's just great. So thank you so much for being here. And if anybody else has any other questions, they can go ahead. I'm going to have to step out now. But I wanted to thank you all for being here. Thanks, Cameron, and everybody that's here.
Thank you all very much.
Hey, cheers to another beautiful Saturday tasting.
You're here.
Cheers, everyone.
Everybody.
Thank you, Cameron.
Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Take care.